She left believing it would be a special night, but she found another in the place that was hers. What was meant to be love turned into humiliation. And there, she discovered the price of truth. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The night in London was unusually warm for October. Marianne adjusted her white linen dress for the 10th time since leaving home, feeling the weight of her 7-month belly pull at the delicate fabric. She had chosen that dress with such care, wanting to look impeccable for the night her husband had promised would be special. Luke had said he had closed an important contract with international investors and that they would celebrate at the Savoy Grill, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, frequented by entrepreneurs, celebrities, and people who were part of a world Marianne was still learning to navigate. Married for 4 years to Luke Marsden, a tech entrepreneur, Marianne had built her life around him. She had left her teaching job when he insisted they didn't need 2 incomes, that she could dedicate herself to taking care of the home and soon the children they had planned so much for. Or at least that's what she believed they both planned. In recent months, Luke had become increasingly distant, colder, always busy with meetings that extended into the early hours and last-minute trips. Marianne attributed everything to work stress, to the pressure of keeping the company growing in a competitive market. She understood. She always understood. The private driver Luke had sent to pick her up drove in silence through the streets of Kensington, where they lived, towards Mayfair, where the Savoy Grill was located. Marianne looked out the window, watching the city lights twinkle like terrestrial stars, and felt a growing unease in her chest. Something wasn't right. Her maternal instinct, sharpened with each day of her pregnancy, whispered warnings that her rational mind tried to silence. "Don't be foolish, Marianne," she told herself. "Luke is just tired. Today will be different. Today he will look at her like he used to. He will lovingly touch her belly. He will talk about names for the baby." When the car stopped in front of the restaurant, Marianne took a deep breath, adjusted the pearl necklace that had been an anniversary gift, and stepped out carefully. The doorman opened the smoked glass door for her, and Marianne entered the atmosphere of discreet luxury that characterized the Savoy Grill. The restaurant was decorated in shades of gold and ivory, with crystal chandeliers casting a soft light over the fine wooden tables. A pianist played something melancholic in the background, and the sound of low conversations mingled with the clinking of glasses and silver cutlery. Marianne searched for Luke with her eyes, and her heart skipped a beat when she found him. He was sitting at a table in the back, dressed in a dark grey suit she didn't recognize, his hair slicked back in a different way. But he wasn't alone. There was a woman beside him. A woman Marianne didn't know, but who seemed to know her husband very well. She was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a tight red dress that violently contrasted with the restrained elegance of the setting. Her lips were painted blood red, and she laughed at something Luke said, touching his arm with an intimacy that made Marianne's stomach churn. For a moment, Marianne thought about turning around and leaving. But then Luke saw her. Their eyes met, and instead of the warmth she expected to see, she found only coldness. Luke didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't stand up to greet her. He just watched her, as if evaluating an object he wasn't sure he wanted to keep or discard. The woman in red followed his gaze, and when she saw Marianne, a cruel smile formed on her lips. Marianne walked towards the table, feeling her legs tremble and the baby's weight pulling at her center of gravity. Each step felt like an eternity. She felt the gaze of other customers on her, judging her simple dress, her prominent belly, her inadequacy in that world of perfect appearances. When she reached the table, Luke finally stood up, but it was to pull out the chair for the woman in red, not to greet his wife. "Luke, what's happening?" Marianne asked, her voice trembling. "You said it was a celebration. Who is she?" Luke sighed as if Marianne had asked an inconvenient question about the weather. "This is Veronica. She's my partner in the new venture. Veronica, this is Marianne, my wife." The way he said wife sounded like a burden, not a title of love. Veronica extended her hand to Marianne but did not stand up. Her handshake was brief and dismissive, and Marianne felt the coldness of her fingers against her warm skin. "Pleasure to finally meet you," Veronica said. Luke talks about you so much. Well, he used to. Lately, he's been quite busy with more important things. Marianne felt her blood run cold. She looked at Luke, expecting him to defend his wife, to put that woman in her place. But he merely sat down again, picked up the glass of red wine on the table and took a long sip as if the entire scene had nothing to do with him. "Sit down, Marianne. You're drawing attention standing there in the middle of the restaurant." Marianne obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because her legs couldn't support her much longer. She pulled out a chair and sat down with difficulty, her belly hitting the edge of the table. A waiter appeared immediately, offering a menu and water. Marianne accepted the water with trembling hands, drinking it all at once, trying to buy time to process what was happening. "So, Marianne," Veronica began, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "Luke told me you're expecting a baby. What a delightful surprise. I didn't know you were planning to expand your family right now with the company in an expansion phase and so much going on." The way she said it, with that tone of false sympathy, made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. Marianne looked at Luke, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. But Luke avoided her gaze, focused on cutting a piece of meat on the plate that Marianne hadn't even noticed was already there. They had already started dinner, without waiting for her, without caring about her. "Yes," Marianne replied, her voice failing. "We're very happy. We always wanted to have children." Veronica tilted her head, as if analyzing a work of art she didn't understand. "Always? How interesting. Luke told me the exact opposite. He said he never wanted children, that the pregnancy was an unfortunate accident that complicated everything. But perhaps I misunderstood." Marianne felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. She turned to Luke, her eyes wide, silently pleading for him to deny it, to say it was a lie. But Luke merely sighed again, put his fork and knife aside, and finally looked at her. And what Marianne saw in those eyes that had once looked at her with love was indifference, a cold, calculated indifference. "Veronica, please stop being dramatic. And you, Marianne, stop making that victim face. We're among adults here. We can have a civilized conversation." Marianne could barely breathe. The restaurant seemed to be spinning around her, the chandelier lights blurring into golden streaks. She placed her hand over her belly, feeling the baby stir, as if it too sensed the danger hanging in the air. "Luke, what's happening? Please explain." "What's happening, Marianne, is that we need to have a conversation about the future, about our future, or rather, about the lack of one." Veronica leaned back in her chair, elegantly crossing her legs, and picked up her glass of red wine. She swirled it slowly, watching the dark red liquid reflect the candlelight, a satisfied smile on her lips. The pianist continued playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding at that table. Some nearby customers began to cast discreet glances in their direction, sensing the growing tension in the air. "Marianne," Luke continued, his voice controlled, but cold as ice, "I want a divorce. Veronica and I have been together for over a year. We love each other. And this baby, well, he's not part of my plans. Never was." The words fell upon Marianne like stones. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her brain refused to process what she was hearing. A year. They had been together for a year. Throughout her entire pregnancy. Throughout all the promises, all the smiles, all the moments when she had believed she was building a family. "You're leaving me now? I'm 7 months. Pregnant, Luke. 7 months with your child. Yes, I know how long you've been pregnant. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation now. The sooner we resolve this, the better. I've already spoken with my lawyers. You'll sign the divorce papers, you'll move out of the house, and I'll give you a basic allowance for you and the child. Nothing more than what's necessary." Veronica let out a low chuckle, taking another sip of wine. "Oh, Luke, you're being very generous. I think basic is even too much, considering she hasn't worked in years and depends completely on you." Marianne felt tears begin to burn her eyes, but she held them back. No, she wasn't going to cry in front of them. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. She tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't respond. The shock was too great, the betrayal too deep. Luke, we built a life together, 4 years of marriage. How can you just throw everything away? And our baby? He's your son." He shrugged, as if talking about the cancellation of an unimportant dinner. "Things change, Marianne. People change. I've changed, and you need to accept that and move on. The faster you sign the papers, the less painful it will be for everyone." Veronica leaned forward, resting her elbow on the table, the low neckline of her red dress drawing attention. "You know, Marianne, I even feel sorry for you. It must be hard to realize you were never enough. But look on the bright side, at least now you're free to find someone who truly wants you. Although, to be honest, with a baby in tow, your options will be quite limited." Something inside Marianne broke, a dam of months of distrust, of lonely nights, of unreturned embraces, of poorly told excuses, of broken promises. She stood up, this time with force, her voice coming out louder than she intended. "You have no right to speak to me like that. You know nothing about me, about us, about what we built." Veronica also stood up, and suddenly the two women were face to face. Marianne in her white dress, stained with the sweat of anxiety, Veronica in her impeccable and provocative red. The entire restaurant seemed to have fallen silent. Even the pianist had stopped playing. "I know everything I need to know, darling. I know Luke chose me. I know you're the past and I'm the future, and I know you need to learn to accept your new reality." And then, in a movement so swift Marianne didn't even have time to react, Veronica picked up the glass of red wine from the table and, with a cruel smile, poured its entire contents over Marianne's white dress. The red liquid streamed down the delicate fabric, staining, dyeing, destroying it. Marianne gasped, her hands automatically going to her belly, protecting the baby from the shock, from the cold wine, from the humiliation. The restaurant erupted in whispers. Waiters rushed to the scene but stopped at a safe distance, unsure how to intervene. Customers pulled out their cell phones. Some began to record. The manager appeared from somewhere, his face red with embarrassment. But no one did anything. No one defended Marianne. She was alone in the middle of a crowded restaurant, completely alone. Marianne looked at Luke, silently pleading with her eyes for him to do something, to defend her, to show a minimum of humanity. But Luke merely sighed, annoyed, as if Marianne were the inconvenience in that situation. "Marianne, stop being dramatic. It was just wine. You're overreacting and causing a scene. If you can't behave like an adult, you'd better go home." "It was just wine." The words echoed in Marianne's mind like a sentence. She looked at her ruined dress, at the red stains that looked like blood, at her belly where her child was growing, oblivious to the horror unfolding. And then she looked around, at all those faces watching her, with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. No one was going to help her. No one was going to defend her. She was alone, but then, as if the universe had heard her silent despair, the restaurant door opened, and the air changed. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. The vibe in the room transformed into something dense, heavy, charged with an energy that made everyone look towards the entrance. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccable black suit. His eyes, dark as the London night outside, swept the restaurant with calculated precision until they found exactly what they were looking for. Marianne. It was Gabriel, her older brother. And by the expression on his face, he already knew everything. "Tell me your opinion of this story and how you think it will end." Gabriel Ashton was not a man of many words. He never had been. From childhood, when he defended his younger sister from school bullies, to today, at 38, a successful corporate security entrepreneur, he had learned that actions spoke louder than words. And at that moment, as his eyes swept across the Savoy Grill until they landed on the scene unfolding in the background, every muscle in his body prepared for action. He had seen everything. The wine being poured over Marianne, the cruel laugh of the woman in red, the expression of disdain on Luke's face. Gabriel had received a message from one of his contacts, a security guard who worked in the building where Luke's office was located, alerting him to an intercepted conversation days earlier. Gabriel had his methods. He had his information network. And when it came to his younger sister, the only family he had left after they lost their parents in a car accident 5 years ago, he spared no effort. Gabriel walked through the restaurant with measured steps, the sound of his Italian leather shoes echoing in the silence that had formed. Customers turned to observe him. Some women whispered comments about his imposing presence, but he paid no attention to any of it. His eyes were fixed on Marianne, who was trembling in her wine-stained dress, her hands protectively over her belly, her face pale with shock and humiliation. When he reached the table, Gabriel said nothing initially. He merely took off his suit jacket and, with a gentleness that violently contrasted with his serious expression, placed it over Marianne's shoulders, covering the red stains on her dress. Then, with a firm but soft hand, he touched his sister's chin, lifting her face so she would look at him. "Mary, look at me. Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" Marianne blinked, tears finally escaping and rolling down her cheeks. Upon seeing her brother, the strength she had been trying to maintain crumbled. She nodded, but her voice came out choked. "Gabriel, I didn't know, it all happened so fast. I know, sis, I know. Now take a deep breath for me. Breathe for the baby. You're safe now." Gabriel then turned to Luke and Veronica, who had remained standing, observing the scene with different expressions. Luke seemed annoyed, as if Gabriel's arrival was an inconvenience he hadn't foreseen. Veronica, on the other hand, maintained that arrogant smile, feeling protected by Luke's presence and the certainty of her victory. "You must be the husband and the mistress," Gabriel said, his voice low but sharp as a razor. His tone was calm, dangerously calm. "Let me guess. Luke Marsden, tech entrepreneur, heir to the Marsden fortune, a man who thinks he can do whatever he wants because he has money. And you must be Veronica Cross, marketing executive, 32 years old, twice divorced, known for getting involved with married men. Am I right?" Veronica lost some color in her face. "How do you know my full name?" "I know many things, Ms. Cross. For example, I know that you and Luke met at a conference in New York 13 months ago. I know you started your affair 3 weeks later. I know Luke transferred £200,000 to your private account in the last 6 months. And I know you plan to open a company together once his divorce is finalized. Shall I continue?" The restaurant was in absolute silence now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Luke stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Who do you think you are to come here and investigate me? This is an invasion of privacy. I can sue you for this." Gabriel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You can try. But before that, let's talk about a few things. First, about how you plan to leave my sister with nothing. I have here," Gabriel pulled an envelope from the inner pocket of his waistcoat, "copies of emails between you and your lawyer discussing how to use legal loopholes to annul the marital property regime. How to claim, 'My sister is mentally unstable,' to take custody of the baby. How to block all her bank accounts to force her to accept an unfavorable settlement." Marianne gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Luke, that can't be true. You wouldn't do that. Not with our child." Luke didn't respond. His jaw was tense, his eyes fixed on Gabriel with a mixture of anger and fear. Veronica, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to mitigate. "Look, I think there's a misunderstanding here. We were just trying to resolve things civilly." "Civilized?" Gabriel repeated, his voice rising for the first time. "Do you think throwing wine on a pregnant woman in the middle of a restaurant is civilized? Do you think planning to leave her destitute is civilized? Do you think threatening her with losing custody of her own child is civilized?" With each question, Gabriel took a step towards them. Luke recoiled, but Veronica remained firm, though her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer purse. "You don't understand the situation," she said, her voice less confident now. "Luke doesn't love her anymore. That happens. People fall in love with others. There's no crime in that." "You're right," Gabriel replied, stopping directly in front of her. "There's no crime in falling out of love with someone, but there is a crime in psychological abuse, in threats, in coercion, and you both committed all these crimes today in front of dozens of witnesses." Gabriel turned to the restaurant, his voice now loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did anyone here see what happened? Did anyone see this woman throw wine on my pregnant sister? Did anyone hear the threats this man made?" For a moment, no one moved. Then a gray-haired lady sitting 2 tables ahead stood up. "I saw everything. she said, her voice firm. It was outrageous. That young woman didn't do anything. She was just trying to understand what was happening, and that woman in red deliberately threw wine on her. And yes, I heard her husband say he would financially block her if she didn't leave. Another man stood up. I also saw and heard. I even have it all recorded on my phone. My wife and I were shocked by the situation. We were going to call the manager, but this gentleman arrived first. One by one, several customers began to speak. Up. Some had recordings, others were just witnesses, but all confirmed the same story. Gabriel nodded, grateful. Then he turned to the restaurant manager, who was standing near the bar with an expression of deep discomfort. "Mr. Manager, I imagine this establishment has security cameras, doesn't it?" The manager, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed mustache, nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We have cameras throughout the dining room, and before you ask, I've already requested my staff to preserve the recordings from tonight. We do not tolerate this kind of behavior in our establishment. These two," he pointed to Luke, "and Veronica, are no longer welcome here." Luke exploded. "This is ridiculous. You can't kick me out. I've been a VIP customer of this restaurant for years. I spend fortunes here." "You were," the manager corrected, his voice cold. "Your VIP status has just been revoked, and if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call security." Veronica, realizing the situation was completely lost, grabbed Luke's arm. "Let's go, Luke. This isn't worth it. Leave her with her protective brother. We have more important things to do." But Gabriel wasn't finished, not yet. He took another step towards Luke, getting so close he could see sweat forming on the other man's forehead. "Before you go, there's one more thing I need to clarify. That baby my sister is expecting, he's not just her nephew, he's my nephew. And I promise you both that I will do everything, use every resource I have, every contact, every connection, to ensure this baby grows up safely, with love, and without the influence of either of you. And as for you, Luke, if you try to take one penny of what Marianne is entitled to, if you try to complicate the divorce, if you try to harm her in any way, you will discover that there are people in this world who have far more power and influence than you imagine." The threat hung in the air like a promise. Luke opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. For the first time that night, he seemed truly scared. Veronica pulled him again. "Come on, Luke, now." Gabriel stepped back, returning to Marianne, who watched everything with wide eyes, still processing what was happening. Luke and Veronica began to move away, but then Marianne, finding a strength she didn't even know she possessed, spoke. Her voice was low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Luke, wait!" He stopped, turning slightly. Marianne stood up, adjusting Gabriel's jacket over her shoulders. She took a few steps towards her husband, or ex-husband. She no longer knew what he was. When she was close enough, she looked him in the eyes, those eyes that had once made her feel loved. "I loved you," Marianne said, her voice choked but firm. "I loved you with every piece of my being. I gave up who I was to be who you wanted me to be. I left my job, my friends, my dreams, all because you said you loved me, that you would take care of me, that we would build a life together. And I believed you. God, how I believed you. But today, you showed me who you really are. And you know what? You didn't destroy me. You freed me." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, letting everyone see her pain, her truth. "Because I finally understand that I deserve more than this. I deserve someone who truly loves me, not who pretends to love when it's convenient. And my son," she placed her hand over her belly, "he deserves a real father, not a man who threatens his own child before he's even born. So you can go, Luke. You can go with her, with your threats, with your cruel plans, because I will be fine. My son will be fine. And you'll have to live knowing you abandoned the greatest gift life could give you for nothing but your own selfishness." The silence that followed was broken by applause, first timid, coming from the grey-haired lady, then another and another, until the entire restaurant was applauding Marianne. Some customers had tears in their eyes. Waiters clapped. Even the pianist, who had remained silent all this time, began to play again, a soft and hopeful melody. Luke looked around, seeing himself surrounded by looks of disapproval and support directed at Marianne. He pressed his lips together, grabbed Veronica's hand, and without another word, left the restaurant like a defeated man. Veronica followed him, but not before casting one last venomous glance at Marianne, a look that said it wasn't over yet, but Marianne didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt she could breathe. Gabriel enveloped his sister in a careful hug, mindful of her belly. "Marie, you were incredible," he murmured in her ear. "Mum and Dad would be so proud of you." Marianne then collapsed, crying on her brother's shoulder, all the emotions she had held back finally finding release. Gabriel just held her, letting her cry, whispering words of comfort. The restaurant manager approached, offering his private office so Marianne could compose herself. Gabriel accepted, thanking him, and guided his sister away from the curious glances. In the office, a small but comfortable room with leather sofas and a wooden table, Marianne finally managed to calm down. Gabriel brought water, tissues, and sat beside her, holding her hand. "Marie, we need to talk about what comes next. You can't go back home, at least not today. You're coming with me. You'll stay at my apartment until we get things sorted." Marianne shook her head, wiping her face. "Gabriel, I can't put you out like this. You've already done so much for me today." "You're not putting me out. You're my sister, Marie. You and this baby are all the family I have. And I won't leave you alone in this. Tomorrow we'll find the best family law solicitor in London. We'll make sure you receive everything you're entitled to, and more importantly, that you have full custody of this baby. Luke won't take anything from you. I promise you that." "What if he fights?" Marianne asked, her voice small. "He has money, Gabriel. He has influence. He can hire the best solicitors." "And I have proof." Gabriel pulled out the envelope he had shown in the restaurant again. "There's more than just emails in here, Marie. There are recorded conversations, suspicious bank transfers, proof that Luke diverted money from your company to finance his mistress. There's evidence that he planned to leave you with nothing long before today. I'd been investigating him for weeks because something didn't smell right. And I was right." Marianne looked at her brother with admiration and gratitude. "How did you know?" Big Brother's intuition, and perhaps the fact that Luke always seemed too good to be true. Men who are too perfect are always hiding something, and the more I investigated, the more rotten I discovered. A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. The manager entered, followed by 2 police officers. Gabriel immediately stood up, placing himself between the officers and Marianne. The officers, an older man with a grey moustache and a young woman with attentive eyes, raised their hands in a gesture of peace. "Calm down, sir. We're not here to cause trouble. We were called by the manager to register a report of assault and threat. We'd like to hear the lady's version, if she feels comfortable speaking." Marianne looked at Gabriel, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began to recount everything. The dinner invitation, Veronica's presence, the thrown wine, Luke's threats, everything. The policewoman noted everything, on a tablet, asking specific questions, her face growing increasingly serious as the story unfolded. The older police officer shook his head, visibly disturbed. When Marianne finished, the policewoman closed her tablet and looked at her with compassion. "Mrs. Marsden, what happened today was unacceptable. We will file a full police report. With the witnesses who have already identified themselves, the security camera footage, and the evidence your brother possesses, you have a very strong case. I strongly recommend that you seek an attorney specializing in domestic abuse and family law as soon as possible." "Domestic abuse," Marianne repeated, her expression stunned. "But he didn't hit me. He didn't physically assault me." "It doesn't have to be physical to be abuse," the policewoman gently explained. "Psychological abuse, financial coercion, threats, public humiliation, all of these fall under domestic abuse. And in your case, considering you are pregnant, the severity is even greater. Domestic abuse laws protect you, madam, and we will ensure that this protection is enforced." After the police officers left, taking copies of the recordings and a list of witnesses, Marianne felt exhausted. Gabriel noticed and stood up, extending his hand to her. "Let's go home, sis. You need to rest. Tomorrow we'll sort out the rest." Marianne took his hand, rising with difficulty. As they walked through the restaurant, now almost empty since it was late at night, several staff members stopped to speak with her. The grey-haired lady was still there, waiting. She approached, taking Marianne's hands in hers. "My dear, I just wanted to say that you are a very courageous woman. What you said to that man, the way you stood firm even while so vulnerable, was inspiring. If you need a witness or anything at all, here is my card. My name is Helen, and I am a retired solicitor. I know good people who can help you." Marianne accepted the card with tears in her eyes, thanking her. Helen gave her hand a gentle pat. "Take care of yourself, dear, and take care of that baby. He's lucky to have a mother like you." Outside, the London night remained warm, but Marianne felt a coolness in the air that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it was just the feeling of freedom beginning to blossom in her chest. Gabriel helped her into his car, a comfortable black sedan, and began to drive through the city's illuminated streets. Marianne looked out the window, watching the lights pass, and for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to think about the future. Not a future planned by Luke, but her own future. A future where she could be who she truly was, where she could raise her child with love and dignity, where she wouldn't have to walk on eggshells or diminish herself to fit someone else's expectations. And thinking about it, even with all the pain, all the betrayal, all the humiliation of that night, Marianne felt something ignite within her. Hope. The first rays of sunlight entered through the window of Gabriel's apartment when Marianne woke up. For a brief moment, opening her eyes and seeing the unfamiliar ceiling, she didn't know where she was. Then everything came back at once. The restaurant, the wine, the threats, the humiliation, and Gabriel, her brother who had appeared like an avenging angel at the moment she needed him most. Marianne placed her hand over her belly, feeling the baby stirred gently, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone, that she had a reason to go on. Gabriel's apartment was in Notting Hill, in a modern building with 24-hour security. He had always been careful, always planned everything in advance, always prepared for the worst. And at that moment, Marianne thanked God for having such a brother. She got up slowly, her body heavy from pregnancy and the emotional exhaustion of the previous night. She put on the bathrobe Gabriel had left for her and left the guest bedroom. In the kitchen, Gabriel was already awake, dressed in a light blue dress shirt and black tailored trousers, preparing coffee. He looked up when Marianne entered and smiled, a small but warm smile. "Good morning, sleepyhead. How are you feeling?" Marianne sat on the kitchen island stool, accepting the cup of chamomile tea Gabriel offered her. Tired, confused, but strangely relieved. "It's like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying has been lifted from my shoulders." Gabriel nodded, pouring himself black coffee. "That's because you finally saw the truth, Mary. And the truth, however painful, always sets you free. Now you can start building a real life, not an illusion you were trying to keep alive." He picked up a brown leather folder that was on the table and opened it, taking out several papers. "While you were sleeping, I made a few calls. I booked an appointment with Dr. Felicity Rivers, one of the best family law solicitors in London. She's seeing us today at 10 in the morning. I also booked a follow-up with your obstetrician for tomorrow, just to make sure everything is okay with you and the baby after yesterday's stress." And Gabriel paused, taking out another paper. "I contacted a real estate agent. I don't want to pressure you, but I think it would be good for you to have your own space, a place that's just yours, where you can raise your child in peace." Marianne felt her eyes fill with tears again. She seemed to have an infinite reservoir of them. "Gabriel, I don't know how to thank you. All of this, all this help. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." Gabriel leaned over the island, taking his sister's hand. "Murray, you don't need to repay me for anything. You're my sister. When Mom and Dad died, I promised myself I would always take care of you. And that's what I'm doing. Besides," he smiled, "I'm going to be an uncle. I have to make sure my nephew grows up in a healthy and happy environment." A few hours later, Marianne found herself in Dr. Felicity Rivers' elegant office, located in a commercial building on Regent Street. The office was spacious, with shelves full of law books, diplomas on the walls, and a large window that offered an impressive view of the city. Felicity was a woman in her 50s, with short, elegantly dyed blonde hair, discreet framed glasses, and an impeccable grey suit. Her eyes, however, were warm and welcoming when she shook Marianne's hand. "Mrs. Marsden, it's a pleasure to meet you. Gabriel told me a little about your situation, but I'd like to hear from you what happened." Marianne recounted everything again. Every detail, from when she began to suspect something was wrong in her marriage to the horrific scene at the restaurant the previous night. Felicity listened attentively, making occasional notes on a tablet, her face maintaining a professional expression, but her eyes revealing empathy and, at certain moments, indignation. When Marianne finished, Felicity leaned back in her chair and intertwined her fingers on the table. "Well, Mrs. Marsden, let me be clear with you. What your husband did constitutes psychological abuse, coercion, and threat. With the evidence Gabriel has gathered, and the witnesses from the restaurant, we have an extremely strong case. I will file for a protective order today, preventing Luke from approaching you or attempting any contact other than through legal representatives. I will also request the freezing of all joint accounts to prevent him from transferring or hiding assets." "And the baby?" Marianne asked, her voice trembling. "He talked about trying to take custody. Can he do that?" Felicity shook her head firmly. "Not with the evidence we have. A judge would never grant custody to a father who threatened the pregnant mother, who planned to leave her without financial resources, and who showed utter disregard for the child's well-being. The most Luke will get, if he gets anything, will be supervised visitation, and even that I will fight to limit as much as possible, at least until the child is older and can decide for themselves." Marianne felt an immense relief wash over her. "And the divorce? How long will it take?" "In normal cases, it can take months, sometimes years, but given the circumstances, the documented abuse, and the fact that you are pregnant, I will request an expedited process. With luck and a sensible judge, we could have a decree within 3 to 6 months. As for the division of assets, you are entitled to 50% of everything acquired during the marriage. The house where you live, the cars, investments, everything. I will ensure you receive every penny that is rightfully yours." Leaving the office, Marianne felt more hopeful than she had in months. Gabriel was waiting for her in the reception area, and they went down together to have lunch at a nearby Japanese restaurant. As they ate, Gabriel explained more about the next steps. He had already sent a trusted team to the house Marianne shared with Luke to collect her clothes and personal belongings. Everything would be packed and taken to a secure storage facility until she decided where to live. "What about the house?" Marianne asked, toying with the sushi on her plate. "I know I'm entitled to half, but I don't know if I can go back there. There are too many bad memories now." "Then sell your share to him or force the sale and split the money. Don't cling to places, Mary. Places are just structures. What matters is where you feel at peace." The following days turned into a routine of medical appointments, meetings with solicitors, and therapy sessions. Felicity had recommended a psychologist specializing in victims of domestic abuse, and Marianne began attending sessions 3 times a week. At first it was difficult, talking about the marriage, about how she had lost herself in it, about how she had ignored clear signs that something was wrong because she wanted to believe in the illusion of a perfect life. But little by little, session after session, Marianne began to reconnect with who she was before Luke. She remembered that she liked to read, that she spent hours in bookstores and libraries before getting married. She remembered that she loved to cook, to experiment with new recipes, that she dreamed of one day opening a small cafe. She remembered that she had friends she had stopped seeing because Luke always had some excuse for her not to go out, always some commitment he invented to keep her tied down. And for the first time, Marianne began to understand that what she had lived was not love. It was control, disguised as care. 2 weeks after that fateful night at the restaurant, Marianne was at Gabriel's apartment when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, but Gabriel, who was beside her, encouraged her to answer. It was Helen, the grey-haired lady from the restaurant, the retired solicitor. Her voice was sweet and maternal on the phone. Marianne, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the restaurant manager. I was thinking of you and wanted to know how you are. Marianne was touched by the gesture. I'm doing well, Mrs. Helen. Better than I was. I've started therapy, I have a great solicitor, and my brother is helping me a lot. That's wonderful to hear. Look, I know it might seem intrusive, but I'd like to invite you for tea at my house. I have some friends who went through similar situations and formed an informal support group. I thought you might benefit from meeting them, from hearing stories of women who survived and thrived after abusive relationships. Marianne looked at Gabriel, who nodded encouragingly. I'd love to, Mrs. Helen. Thank you very much for the invitation. The tea party took place the following Saturday at Helen's house in a charming Hampstead neighborhood. The house was cozy, full of plants, books, and family photographs. There were 5 other women besides Marianne and Helen, all of different ages with different stories, but all with one thing in common. They had survived abusive relationships and rebuilt their lives. One of them, Beatrice, a 40-year-old architect, told how her ex-husband controlled her financially, how she had to start from scratch with 2 small daughters. Today, 10 years later, she had her own architectural firm, and her daughters were in university. Another, Camilla, a 28-year-old teacher, spoke about how long it took her to realize she was in an abusive relationship because there was no physical violence, only psychological. It was only when a friend confronted her that she woke up to reality. Each story was different, but they all carried the same message. It was possible to start over. It was possible to be happy again. It was possible to raise children alone and give them a life full of love and security. Marianne cried listening to those women, but they were tears of relief, of hope, of realizing that she wasn't alone, that there was an entire community of women who had walked the same painful path and emerged stronger on the other side. When Marianne returned to Gabriel's apartment that afternoon, she felt different, lighter, more confident. Gabriel immediately noticed the change in her expression. How was it? It was amazing, Gabe. I met incredible women who went through terrible things and managed to rebuild themselves. One of them opened an NGO that helps women victims of domestic abuse. Another wrote a book about her experience. All of them are so strong, so inspiring, and you know what I realized? I can be like that too. I can also rise again. Gabriel smiled, proud. I always knew you could, sis. I was just waiting for you to realize it. But not everything was rosy. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the separation, Felicity called with bad news. Luke was contesting the proceedings, alleging that Marianne was emotionally unstable and had exaggerated the events at the restaurant. He had hired a team of elite solicitors and was prepared to fight. Worse still, he was using the media to his advantage, spreading stories that he was the victim, that Marianne was manipulative, and that he had staged the entire restaurant scene to harm him. Marianne was devastated when she heard. She was at a routine checkup with her obstetrician when she received the news and nearly went into premature labor from all the stress. The doctor had to medicate her and keep her under observation for a few hours. Gabriel arrived at the hospital within minutes, furious. He called Felicity immediately, demanding an answer. Felicity, always calm and strategic, explained that this was expected. Men like Luke, accustomed to power and control, don't give up easily, but she had a plan. We'll sue him for defamation. We'll make the restaurant recording public, with the witness's permission. We'll show everyone that he's the abuser, not her. And we will win, Gabriel. I promise you, we will win. And that's what she did. The following week, with Marianne's and the witness's authorization, Felicity strategically leaked parts of the restaurant recording to the press. The video clearly showed Veronica throwing wine on Marianne, Luke making threats, and the reaction of the restaurant's customers. The repercussion was immediate and devastating for Luke. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Marianne. Companies doing business with Luke's company began to cut ties. Investors backed out. And most importantly, public opinion turned completely against him. Luke tried to give an interview to defend himself, but only made things worse. He appeared nervous, sweating, his excuses sounding empty and rehearsed. When the interviewer asked about the threats he had made, Luke tried to minimize them, saying he was just nervous and that Marianne had misunderstood. But the recordings didn't lie. The witnesses didn't lie. And the public wasn't fooled. Marianne watched the interview from Gabriel's apartment, holding a cup of tea between her hands. She felt no satisfaction in seeing Luke sink, only a deep sadness for the man he had revealed himself to be. The man she married or thought she had married didn't exist. Perhaps he never had. Perhaps she had fallen in love with an illusion, with a version of Luke he presented to the world, but which wasn't real. Gabriel turned off the television and sat beside his sister. "How are you?" Sad, but also relieved, because now everyone knows the truth, and I don't have to carry this alone anymore. That night, Marianne had a dream. She was in an open field full of wildflowers, with the baby in her arms. The sun shone in the cloudless blue sky, and she could hear a child's laughter. When she looked down, she saw that the baby had her eyes, brown and bright, and a smile that lit up his entire little face. And in that dream, Marianne knew that everything would be all right, that she and her son would have a life full of love, joy, and peace, a life they would build together, far from lies, far from manipulation, far from pain. When she woke up the next morning, Marianne placed her hand over her belly and made a promise. To the son who hadn't yet been born, "I will protect you. I will give you all the love I have, and I will teach you that you deserve to be loved truly, not falsely. I will teach you to recognize true love when it appears, and to flee from love that hurts. And I will teach you that being strong doesn't mean not crying, but it means getting up every time you fall." Gabriel knocked on the bedroom door, bringing breakfast. "Marie," Felicity called, "there's good news. Luke has given up contesting the divorce. He will accept the division of assets according to the law and will no longer fight for custody. Apparently, the public pressure was too much for him. He just wants it to be over quickly." Marianne took a deep breath, letting the news settle. "It's over then. It's really over." "It's over," Gabriel confirmed, smiling. "Now you can focus on what truly matters, you and your baby." And focus was exactly what Marianne did. She began looking for apartments, places that would make her feel at home. She started buying things for the baby, a white crib, tiny clothes, soft toys. She began thinking about names. If it was a boy, perhaps Michael, in honor of their father whom they loved so much. If it was a girl, perhaps Luna, because she would be born in a new phase of Marianne's life, a new moon full of promises. A month after the separation, Marianne was in a baby furniture store when she felt the first contraction. It wasn't strong, just a tightening, but she knew what it was. The baby was coming. She called Gabriel immediately, who dropped everything and rushed to pick her up. On the way to the hospital, Marianne held her brother's hand, breathing deeply with each contraction. She was scared but also excited. She would finally meet her son. She would finally hold in her arms the reason why everything was worth it. At the hospital, between contractions and breaths, Marianne thought about everything that had happened in recent months, the betrayal, the humiliation, the pain, but also the liberation, the strength she discovered she possessed, the support she had received. And she thought that perhaps, just perhaps, all of it had happened for a reason. For her to wake up, for her to find herself again, for her to become the woman and mother she needed to be. And when she finally heard the baby's first cry, when the nurse placed that tiny, perfect being in her arms, Marianne knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choices, that she had had the courage to leave, to fight, to start over. And that from that moment on, everything would be different. Everything would be better, because she was no longer living in anyone's shadow. She was living in her own light. The baby's cry filled the hospital room with a song Marianne would never forget. It was a boy, Michael Ashton Smith. 7 kilograms and 300 grams of pure life, of materialized hope, of unconditional love. When the nurse placed that tiny being in her arms, Marianne felt something inside her completely transform. All the doubts, all the fears, all the insecurities that had tormented her for months simply vanished. She looked at that wrinkled little face, the closed eyes, the tiny fingers that clutched her own, and knew she was looking at her purpose. Gabriel was beside her with tears in his eyes, watching his nephew with an expression of pure adoration. He's perfect, Murray. Look at that little nose. He has Dad's nose. Marianne laughed through tears, agreeing. And Mum's mouth. Look how he purses his lips like that. It's just like she did in photos. The 3 days in the hospital were a mixture of exhaustion and ecstasy. Marianne barely slept, not because Michael was a difficult baby, but because she couldn't stop looking at him, touching his fine hair, counting his tiny fingers and toes, marveling at every movement, every sound, every breath. Gabriel visited her every day, always bringing flowers, homemade food, and gifts for Michael. On the second day, Helen's support group, friends appeared, bringing more gifts, more love, more strength. Helen held Michael with the experience of someone who had raised 4 children and 7 grandchildren. He's a warrior, this boy. Look at the strength with which he holds my finger. He came into the world with purpose, Marianne, just as you were reborn with purpose. On the 3rd day, as Marianne was about to be discharged, a nurse entered the room with a strange expression. There was someone at the reception asking to visit her, a man. She said the name, and Marianne felt her stomach clench. Luke. Gabriel, who was in the room helping to pack Michael's things, tensed immediately. He can't come in. The protective order prevents any approach. I know, the nurse replied. That's why he's at reception and not here. But he's insisting very strongly. He said he just wants to see his son, that he has that right. Marianne looked at Michael, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm wash over her. Ask him to wait. I'll go down and speak with him. But only me, and in the presence of security. Mari, you don't have to do this, Gabriel protested. Let me handle this. Let me get him out of here. No, Gabe, I need to do this. I need to close this chapter, for myself and for Michael. 20 minutes later, Marianne was in the hospital reception waiting room with 2 security guards beside her and Gabriel observing from a distance, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of trouble. Luke was sitting in one of the blue plastic chairs, his hands clasped, his head bowed. When he raised his face and saw her, Marianne barely recognized him. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 months. There were deep dark circles under his eyes. His hair was disheveled, his beard unshaven. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, so different from the impeccable executive she had known. Marianne, he said, his voice hoarse. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Marianne remained standing, keeping her distance. 5 minutes, Luke. You have 5 minutes. Say what you came to say. Luke stood up, but the security guards took a step forward, making him stop. He raised his hands in a sign of peace and remained where he was. He began, his voice faltering. I came to apologize. I know it means nothing after everything I've done, but I needed to say it. I was horrible to you. I was cruel, selfish, cowardly, and I hate myself for it every day. Marianne crossed her arms, waiting. It wasn't sympathy she felt, but it wasn't anger either. It was just a desire to understand, to have answers. Why, Luke? Why did you do all of that? If you didn't love me anymore, if you wanted to be with her, why didn't you just tell me? Why did you have to humiliate me like that? Luke ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Marianne recognized from when he was nervous. Because I'm a coward. Because I thought if I made you look like the villain, it would be easier for me. If I pushed you to hate me, I wouldn't have to deal with the guilt of having betrayed you. But it didn't work. The guilt only grew, and when that video leaked, when the whole world saw me for who I really was, I realized I had destroyed the only good thing I had in my life. And Veronica? Marianne asked, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. Where is she? Luke let out a bitter laugh. She left me, the day after the video leaked, when investors started pulling out, when the company began to sink. She said she hadn't signed up to deal with a failure, that she deserved better. And then she left, probably to find the next fool to manipulate. Marianne felt a pang of something that could have been pity, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. You made your own bed, Luke, and now you have to lie in it. But I didn't come here to listen to your justifications. You said you wanted to see your son. Why, you made it very clear that night that you didn't want him. Luke swallowed hard, and Marianne saw tears form in his eyes. Because I was lying. To myself, to you, to everyone. The truth is, I was terrified. Terrified of being a father, of not being good enough, of failing. And instead of admitting that, I ran. I destroyed everything. And now I've lost everything. The company is almost bankrupt. Veronica used me and threw me away. My family has turned against me. All I have is the possibility of meeting my son. And I know I don't deserve it, Mary. I know I don't deserve anything. But please let me at least see him, just once. You can see him, Marianne said finally, but with conditions. You enter the room with the security present. You don't hold him, you just look. And after that you accept the agreement Felicity proposed. You don't fight for custody, you don't try to stop me from raising him the way I see fit. You can ask for supervised visits when he's older. If you truly change and prove you're capable of being a real father. But for now you stay out of our lives, understood? Luke nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. And I accept. Thank you, Marie. Truly. Back in the room, Marianne sat in the chair beside the crib where Michael slept. Gabriel was tense, clearly dissatisfied with his sister's decision to let Luke in, but he respected it. Luke entered, accompanied by 2 security guards, walking slowly, as if entering a sacred place. When he saw Michael for the first time, his face transformed. All the arrogance, all the ego, everything disappeared, replaced by pure admiration. He's beautiful, Luke whispered, stopping at a respectful distance from the crib. He looks like you. He looks like himself, Marianne corrected. He is Michael. And he will grow up knowing he is loved, protected, and valued. Things you didn't know how to give. Luke didn't respond. He just stood there for a few minutes, looking at his son, before finally turning to leave. At the door, he stopped. Marie, I truly am sorry. For everything. And I hope that one day, perhaps years in the future, you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours, so you can move forward without carrying anger. I'm already moving forward, Luke, and as for forgiveness, perhaps one day, but that day isn't today. Luke nodded and left, escorted by the security guards. Gabriel approached Marianne, placing his hand on her shoulder. You were very generous with him, sis. I wasn't generous with him, I was fair to Michael. He deserves to know the whole story when he grows up. He deserves to be able to make his own choices about his father. I won't be the one to take that away from him. The following months were a roller coaster of firsts. The first time Michael smiled, the first time he slept through the night, the first time he grabbed Gabriel's finger and wouldn't let go, the first time Marianne took him to visit his grandparents' grave, whispering to them that they were watching everything from above and that she was finally well, finally at peace. Marianne found a charming apartment in Notting Hill, close to Gabriel, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a park. She decorated Michael's room with shades of blue and yellow, filled it with stuffed animals and children's books. In the living room, she set up a small reading nook, rediscovering her love for books that she had abandoned for so long. With the division of divorce assets, Marianne had financial stability. She wasn't rich, but she had enough to live comfortably and raise Michael with dignity. And most importantly, she had her freedom. She could make decisions without asking permission. She could go out whenever she wanted. She could be who she truly was, without fear of judgment or reprisal. 6 months after Michael's birth, Helen invited Marianne to participate in a lecture on female resilience that her group was organizing. At first, Marianne hesitated. Talking about what she had been through was still difficult, painful. But Helen insisted. Your story can help other women, dear. It can show that it's possible to survive, that it's possible to be reborn. And so, on a rainy Tuesday in April, Marianne found herself standing in a small auditorium in Notting Hill, before 50 women, telling her story. She spoke about the marriage that seemed perfect, but hid control and manipulation. She spoke about the night at the restaurant, about the humiliation, about the threats. She spoke about Gabriel, about Felicity, about Helen and all the women who supported her. And she spoke about Michael, about how he became her strength, her purpose, her reason to move forward. When she finished, the auditorium was silent. Then one woman began to applaud, then another and another, until everyone was standing, applauding, crying, some shouting words of encouragement. After the lecture, several women approached her, sharing their own stories, thanking her for having the courage to speak. One of them, a young woman in her 20s named Julia, held Marianne's hand tightly. "I'm going through exactly what you went through. My boyfriend controls me, diminishes me, makes me feel like I'm nothing without him. But listening to you, I realize that I can leave, that I deserve more. Thank you. Thank you so much." Marianne hugged Julia, whispering in her ear, "Yes, you can, and you will. And when you leave, you'll discover that you're much stronger than you imagine." That night marked the beginning of something new for Marianne. She began giving lectures regularly, sharing her story, helping other women. Helen invited her to volunteer at the NGO that Beatrice had founded, helping women victims of domestic abuse. Marianne discovered she had a natural talent for listening, for comforting, for offering support without judgment. A year after the separation, on a sunny Saturday morning, Marianne was in the park with Michael, who was already starting to take his first wobbly steps. Gabriel was with them, always present, always protective, always the doting uncle who spoiled his nephew without limits. They were sitting on a blanket, having a picnic, when Gabriel looked at his sister and smiled. "You're happy, Murray, truly happy. I can see it in your eyes." Marianne looked at Michael, who was laughing, trying to catch a butterfly, and then at her brother. "I am, Gabe. For the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely happy. Not that forced happiness I pretended to have with Luke, but a real happiness that comes from within, from knowing who I am, from liking who I am." "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you," Gabriel said, his voice choked, "of the woman you've become, of the incredible mother you are." Marianne took her brother's hand. "And they'd be proud of you too, for being my safe harbor, my fortress. I wouldn't have made it without you, Gabe." That night after, putting Michael to sleep, Marianne sat on the apartment balcony with a cup of tea watching the city lights. She thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the struggle, the victory, and she realized that, in a strange way, she was grateful. Grateful for having discovered the truth, for having had the courage to leave, for having found her strength. Because that horrible night at the restaurant, however painful it had been the catalyst for her transformation. She was no longer the Marianne who entered that restaurant, insecure and lost. She was a woman who knew her worth, who wasn't afraid to fight for what was right, who knew she deserved true love and respect. And one day, when Michael was old enough to understand, she would tell him her story. Not to speak ill of his father, but to teach him about resilience, about dignity, about self-love. 2 years after that fateful night, Marianne was unrecognizable. She had gone back to school, pursuing a postgraduate degree in psychology, dreaming of one day opening her own practice, specializing in helping women in abusive situations. She had reconnected with old friends and made new ones. She had learned to trust again, to open herself up again. And most importantly, she had taught Michael, through actions not words, what it meant to be strong, to be kind, to be true. On an autumn afternoon, as the leaves began to fall from the trees in the park near her home, Marianne received a letter. It was from Luke. He wrote saying that he had spent the last 2 years in therapy, working on himself, trying to understand and correct his mistakes. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a second chance. He merely thanked her for allowing him to see Michael that day at the hospital, and said that he hoped someday to be worthy of knowing the son he helped create, but didn't have the courage to love at the right time. Marianne read the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box where she kept important documents. Perhaps one day she would show it to Michael, or perhaps not. She would decide when the time was right, but on that day, she simply left the past where it belonged, in the past. As the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marianne picked Michael up. He was 2 years old now, talked incessantly, asked questions about everything, laughed easily. And when he looked at her with those bright brown eyes and said, "I love you, Mummy," Marianne felt her heart overflow. "I love you too, my love, more than anything in this world." And at that moment, holding her son, in her home that she herself chose, living the life that she herself built, Marianne knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The choice to leave, to fight, to start over. The choice to choose herself and her son above all else. And that choice had made all the difference. Because in the end, that night at the restaurant was not the end of Marianne's story. It was just the beginning of a journey of self-discovery, of healing, of rebirth. A journey that would prove that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. And when it rises, it brings with it the promise of a new day, a new chance, a new life. A life where self-love is the foundation, where dignity is non-negotiable, and where happiness depends on no one but yourself. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Marianne, Gabriel, and Michael's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, overcoming, and rebirth, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what most resonated with you in this story. Do you know someone who needed to hear this message? Share it with them. Every day, we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that no matter how difficult the situation, it is always possible to start over, always possible to rise again, always possible to choose happiness. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life, love, and the strength that exists within each of us.